October 6, 1973. Dawn breaks over the Sinai Desert. The sand glows red under the first light, stretching endlessly to the horizon. Israeli tanks wait silently along defensive lines near the Suez Canal. Engines hum softly. Command radios crackle with tension. Soldiers check weapons, their faces tight with anticipation. Across the desert, Egyptian forces surge forward. Hundreds of tanks, armored personnel carriers, and troops advance under the cover of early morning mist and radio silence. The roar of engines grows louder, echoing over the barren hills. Artillery fires intermittently, sending plumes of smoke into the sky. In a command tent, Israeli officers study maps, their eyes tracing every possible approach the Egyptians might take. Every decision carries weight. Every second counts. If the lines break, cities and soldiers could fall in hours. The desert is vast. The stakes are higher. By noon, the quiet tension will erupt into one of the largest tank battles in modern Middle Eastern history. The Sinai Desert, 1973. A barren, rocky expanse of sand and mountains stretching between Egypt and Israel had long been a front line in the Middle East. The region was scarred by previous wars, especially the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. That defeat humiliated the Egyptian military and left President Anwar Sadat seeking a path to restore national pride and reclaim lost territory. By 1973, the world was caught in a tense balance of power. Israel, backed by the United States, had developed a highly trained military, modern tanks, and advanced air support. Egypt, supported by the Soviet Union, had rebuilt its forces with Soviet tanks, artillery, and surface-to-air missiles. Both sides were preparing, in different ways, for a confrontation they knew could erupt at any moment. Egypt's plan was bold. Sadat coordinated with Syrian leadership, aiming to open simultaneous fronts on the Golan Heights and Sinai. In Sinai, the strategy relied on surprise. Early morning attacks, combined with artillery barrages and air support, would aim to overwhelm Israeli defenses along the Suez Canal. The Egyptians deployed divisions with hundreds of T-54 and T-55 tanks, supported by mechanized infantry. The goal was not just military success but psychological impact, proving that Israel could be challenged. Israel, on the other hand, relied on doctrine shaped by previous conflicts. Their armored divisions were elite, their tank crews trained to react quickly and exploit enemy weaknesses. But there was overconfidence. Israeli intelligence underestimated the speed and coordination of Egyptian forces. Commanders knew that the narrow buffer of the Sinai Desert offered little time to respond once the offensive began. Their defensive lines, built along sand dunes and ridges, would soon face one of the fiercest armored engagements of the 20th century. The political backdrop was equally critical. The Cold War influenced every move. The United States supplied Israel with intelligence, weapons, and logistical support. The Soviet Union supplied Egypt and Syria, providing tanks, anti-tank weapons, and air defense systems. The Sinai Desert became more than a battlefield. It was a stage for superpower rivalry, where every decision carried not only local consequences but global attention. Egypt had also learned from past mistakes. In 1967, they had relied too heavily on massive frontal attacks and poorly coordinated offensives. By 1973, they focused on precision, timing, and integration. Artillery units would soften Israeli positions while anti-tank teams waited in prepared positions. Engineers would quickly bridge canals and clear minefields. Communications were modernized to ensure that orders reached tank commanders at the front lines in real time. The Egyptians knew that speed and coordination could offset Israel's technological edge. For Israel, complacency was dangerous. Many senior officers assumed that armored superiority and air dominance would be enough to repel any attack. But the Egyptian forces had prepared for this. They practiced crossing obstacles under fire, coordinated combined arms maneuvers, and rehearsed battlefield logistics. For every Israeli tank commander, there was a disciplined Egyptian crew ready to exploit a mistake. The Sinai Desert itself shaped the battle. Open plains allowed tanks to move quickly but also exposed them to artillery and air attacks. Sand dunes provided cover but limited visibility. Heat and dust strained both men and machines. Tanks overheated. Radios crackled in static. Soldiers faced exhaustion long before they faced the enemy. Every decision, every maneuver, would be tested by the harsh desert environment. By October 6th, all elements were in place. Egyptian forces were massed along the western bank of the Suez Canal, poised to cross under the cover of darkness. Israeli forces, deployed in defensive positions, monitored every movement, relying on radar, patrols, and early warning systems. Both sides understood that the coming hours would test not just equipment and training, but leadership, strategy, and human endurance. The stage was set for conflict. Tanks, artillery, and infantry would clash in a deadly dance across sand and rock. Every hour carried weight. Every misstep could tip the balance. In the Sinai, geography, technology, and human will combined to produce a crucible where modern armored warfare would be tested on an unprecedented scale. In the weeks leading up to October 6, 1973, tension in the Sinai Desert reached a boiling point. Egyptian forces had conducted extensive reconnaissance, using aerial photography and scouts to study Israeli positions. They mapped tank routes, identified artillery emplacements, and noted defensive obstacles. Every piece of intelligence was analyzed, every possible scenario rehearsed. Egyptian commanders knew that a swift, decisive strike could restore national pride and shift regional power. Israel, meanwhile, had a high level of confidence. Their intelligence relied heavily on signal intercepts, satellite imagery, and reports from spies in Arab capitals. However, there was a critical misjudgment. Israeli analysts assumed that Egyptian forces would not attempt a full-scale assault without massive air cover and longer preparation. This miscalculation created a window of vulnerability that Sadat planned to exploit. The Egyptian army's plan, known as Operation Badr, aimed to cross the Suez Canal and breach the Israeli Bar Lev line, fortified positions running along the eastern bank. Engineers built portable bridges, pontoons, and floating tanks to overcome the canal's natural barrier. Artillery units rehearsed barrages to destroy Israeli fortifications in seconds. Anti-tank missile teams were stationed to intercept the famed Israeli Merkava tanks. Every action was synchronized, down to the minute, to achieve maximum surprise. Meanwhile, morale played a decisive role. Egyptian soldiers were motivated not only by orders but by a sense of purpose. The memory of the 1967 defeat still haunted them, and leaders emphasized that this was a historic moment to reclaim lost honor. On the Israeli side, troops were confident but weary. Years of occupation and small-scale skirmishes had built experience, but also fatigue. Soldiers stationed along the desert lines knew the terrain intimately, but they underestimated the scale and coordination of the approaching Egyptian offensive. The technological dimension was equally important. Israel's armored corps relied on advanced tanks equipped with superior fire control systems, faster engines, and well-trained crews. Egyptian tanks, while technically less advanced, were numerically superior and equipped with Soviet-supplied anti-tank guided missiles. Artillery and missile systems on both sides could reach across the desert, making positioning, camouflage, and timing critical. Every tank commander needed to calculate range, angle, and speed while anticipating enemy movements, a deadly chess game in open sand. Leadership styles also shaped the approaching confrontation. Egyptian commanders emphasized strict coordination and centralized planning, ensuring that every division moved in harmony. Israeli leaders, confident in their crew's initiative, allowed more decentralized decision-making, relying on individual commanders to react to threats. This difference in approach would influence how the battle unfolded. Where Egyptian units followed a rigid plan, Israeli units depended on adaptability, but if caught off guard, that flexibility could become a liability. As the Egyptian forces prepared, the Sinai Desert itself became a silent participant in the conflict. Early morning fog hid troop movements. Sandstorms could reduce visibility to a few meters, forcing tank crews to rely on instruments rather than sight. Temperatures soared during the day and plummeted at night. Radio signals fluctuated, and engines strained under the desert heat. Soldiers carried heavy packs, and crews had to maintain their tanks under extreme conditions. Logistics, the supply of fuel, ammunition, and food, was as critical as battlefield tactics. A breakdown in the supply line could halt an entire division. Diplomacy added another layer of tension. International powers closely monitored the region. The United States warned Israel to remain cautious, fearing escalation. The Soviet Union encouraged Egypt to push forward but also advised restraint to avoid direct confrontation with superpowers. This global dimension made the Sinai not just a local battlefield but a focal point of Cold War strategy. Every tank movement, every artillery strike, had implications beyond the desert. By the eve of the attack, Egyptian troops were positioned along the canal's western bank, hidden behind ridges and desert folds. Israeli outposts scanned the horizon, expecting minor harassment rather than a full-scale assault. Both armies were armed, trained, and ready, yet the desert kept the final outcome uncertain. Every commander knew that a single miscalculation, an overlooked ridge, a delayed order, or a misfired shell, could shift the momentum. The Sinai in 1973 was a crucible of modern warfare. Tanks, infantry, artillery, and engineers would soon collide under the desert sun. Intelligence, strategy, morale, and technology all converged, creating a tense prelude to battle. Soldiers felt it instinctively, something monumental was about to happen. The quiet mornings, the long stretches of sand, and the distant echoes of engines were the calm before the storm. When the Egyptian assault began at dawn, it would be more than a military operation. It would be a test of preparation, leadership, and human endurance. Every maneuver would matter. Every decision could change the course of history. In the barren, unforgiving Sinai, two armies stood ready, unaware that within hours, their tanks would thunder across the desert in one of the largest armored engagements of the 20th century. The first angle in understanding the Sinai tank battles is that of the soldiers on the ground. Israeli tank crews sat inside armored shells, engines idling, scanning the desert for movement. Each crew knew the stakes. A single hit could destroy a tank and kill everyone inside. Dust and heat made conditions harsh. Soldiers felt tension in every heartbeat. Across the canal, Egyptian crews were equally alert. They crawled through trenches, checked ammunition, and coordinated their movements over radios that sometimes crackled with static. For them, this was not only a battle for territory but a chance to reclaim pride after the humiliation of the 1967 defeat. Fear, determination, and anticipation mingled with the dry desert air, shaping every decision in real time. The second angle is battlefield tactics and maneuvering. Both sides used combined arms strategies. Egyptians advanced in waves, with tanks leading, infantry following, and artillery providing cover. Engineers moved forward to bridge the canal and clear mines. Israeli forces relied on defensive formations, using elevated sand ridges for cover and deploying anti-tank teams in hidden positions. Speed, positioning, and timing were critical. One misstep, an exposed flank or delayed communication, could turn a coordinated push into a deadly trap. Commanders had to balance aggression with caution, adapting to the shifting situation with every passing minute. A third angle focuses on weapons and technology. Israeli tanks, such as the Centurion and M60, had superior fire control and armor. Egyptian T-54 and T-55 tanks, though older, were enhanced with Soviet anti-tank missiles. Artillery played a decisive role. Egyptian batteries launched barrages to weaken Israeli defenses, while Israeli tanks returned fire with precision. Anti-tank missile teams, engineers, and mechanized infantry all depended on the technology functioning under extreme desert conditions. Engines overheated. Missiles jammed. Radios failed. Equipment was as much a test of durability as a tool of war. The fourth angle examines intelligence and information. Israel relied on early warning radar, reconnaissance planes, and intercepts of Egyptian communications. They had accurate maps of terrain and defensive positions, but underestimated Egyptian preparation and coordination. Egypt, in contrast, concealed its plans meticulously. Radio silence, camouflage, and night movements kept Israel guessing until the first artillery shells exploded along the Bar Lev line. Spies and analysts influenced decisions far from the front lines, showing that modern armored warfare was not just about tanks but about knowledge and anticipation. A fifth perspective looks at leadership and decision-making. Israeli commanders, confident in their training and equipment, allowed decentralized decision-making. Tank captains were empowered to react on sight, making split-second judgments. Egyptian leaders, following Sadat's orders, enforced strict coordination. Units moved according to a pre-planned timetable, relying on precise execution. This difference meant that Israeli forces could exploit sudden opportunities, but only if they noticed them quickly. Egyptian forces depended on discipline and synchronization, creating an organized advance that was difficult to stop once fully underway. Finally, the enemy perspective provides balance. Egyptian commanders understood Israel's strength and planned around it. Israeli forces were experienced and well-equipped. From their viewpoint, the desert offered risks and opportunities alike. Crossing the canal was dangerous. Any exposed tank could be destroyed by well-placed anti-tank missiles or artillery fire. But surprise, preparation, and numbers could offset technological disadvantages. Both sides approached the battle with respect for the other's capability, shaping strategies and movements in real time. These angles together show that the Sinai tank battles were complex, multifaceted, and influenced by human endurance, technological reliability, strategy, and information. The desert was more than a backdrop. It shaped every choice, every maneuver, and every moment of survival. Another critical angle is logistics and supply, often overlooked but vital in desert warfare. The Sinai Desert was vast and harsh. Fuel, ammunition, water, and food had to reach frontline units over long, exposed supply lines. Israeli armored divisions relied on trucks and convoys that moved under the constant threat of Egyptian artillery and anti-tank teams. A single ambush supply line could immobilize a tank battalion. Egyptian forces faced similar challenges. Engineers and logistic units worked tirelessly to ferry fuel and ammunition across the canal, often under fire. The desert heat added pressure, engines overheated, crews suffered exhaustion, and every mechanical failure had immediate consequences on combat effectiveness. The next perspective focuses on psychological factors and morale. Soldiers on both sides faced fear, fatigue, and uncertainty. Israeli tank crews knew the Egyptians had numerical superiority and had prepared anti-tank missiles, creating tension with every movement. Egyptian soldiers, while confident in their planning, were aware that any delay or mistake could leave them vulnerable to counterattacks. Commanders used morale as a tool, motivating troops with orders, speeches, or visible presence. Maintaining discipline under bombardment was as essential as hitting targets. Every small success, destroying an enemy tank, holding a ridge, or completing a bridge crossing, boosted confidence. Every loss weighed heavily on both sides, influencing decisions and the willingness to push forward. A third perspective is terrain and environmental influence. The Sinai's open plains allowed tanks to maneuver quickly, but sand dunes and ridges created blind spots. Artillery fire could be obscured by desert heat haze, and dust clouds reduced visibility to mere meters. Night attacks relied on limited night vision equipment. Engineers had to navigate mines, canals, and anti-tank ditches. Terrain dictated strategy, where to advance, where to dig in, and which positions offered the best defensive advantage. Both armies had to constantly read the desert and adjust tactics to survive. The fourth angle examines combined arms coordination. The battle was not simply tanks versus tanks. Infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support all had to act together. Egyptian forces synchronized artillery barrages with tank movements and infantry advances. Israeli forces relied on anti-tank teams, artillery, and mobile reserves to counter breakthroughs. Mistimed movements could be disastrous. Success depended on precise timing. Artillery had to fall just before tanks moved forward, bridges had to be ready when armor arrived. Infantry had to clear obstacles without slowing the advance. Each unit's actions were interdependent, turning the desert into a network of coordinated operations rather than isolated skirmishes. A fifth angle focuses on communication and command. Radios and field telephones were lifelines. Egyptian commanders coordinated units across the canal and through the desert using secure radio channels, constantly updating movements. Israeli commanders relied on radar, reconnaissance, and field reports to direct defensive maneuvers. But desert conditions interfered with signals. Dust, heat, and engine noise caused static and occasional delays. Every command had to be clear, concise, and executed immediately. Miscommunication could leave a tank exposed or a unit out of position, changing the balance in seconds. Finally, the long-term strategic consequences perspective shows the battle's broader significance. The Sinai tank battles tested not only the tactical skill of tank crews but also the strategic planning of nations. Egypt demonstrated that careful preparation, coordination, and morale could overcome technological inferiority. Israel learned that overconfidence and underestimation of the enemy carried heavy costs. The outcomes influenced subsequent military doctrine. Both countries revised tank tactics, air support integration, and supply chain management. Lessons from Sinai were studied by militaries worldwide, shaping the future of armored warfare in deserts and beyond. These perspectives together reveal the Sinai tank battles as more than a clash of armored vehicles. They were a convergence of strategy, technology, human endurance, and environmental challenges. Every tank, every soldier, and every decision contributed to the unfolding story, illustrating how modern warfare demands more than strength. It requires intelligence, preparation, and adaptability under pressure. October 6, 1973. To him, the desert was quiet, almost deceptively so. Egyptian forces gathered along the western bank of the Suez Canal. Tanks rumbled softly, engines barely audible over the night wind. Engineers positioned pontoon bridges and portable ferries to cross the canal. Artillery units loaded shells, their crews double-checking calculations. Radio silence dominated. Every sound could give away a position. At 2:30 a.m., the first artillery salvo erupted along the Bar Lev line. Massive shells tore into Israeli fortifications, creating smoke, fire, and chaos. The bombardment was precise, targeting command posts, bunkers, and observation towers. For Israeli soldiers, the explosion was the first clear sign that the Egyptians had struck. Tank crews scrambled to stations, scanning the desert for movement. Officers shouted orders, radios crackled, and the calm of the night vanished instantly. By 3:15 a.m., Egyptian pontoon bridges touched the canal's waters. Infantry and armor began crossing under artillery cover. Anti-tank missile teams were already in place, hidden behind sand ridges and camouflage nets. Egyptian tank columns formed on the eastern bank, ready to advance. The desert became a dynamic, dangerous space. Flames from artillery strikes lit the dunes, dust clouds rose from vehicles, and the sound of engines and gunfire echoed across the sand. Israeli tank crews reacted. Centurion and M60 tanks moved to intercept, positioning themselves along ridges and prepared firing lines. Commanders communicated rapidly, sending reinforcements where the canal had been breached. Air support scrambled, but Egyptian surface-to-air missile teams limited effectiveness. Each tank that advanced faced a deadly combination of artillery, missiles, and opposing armor. Every second carried risk. Hesitation could mean destruction. By 4 a.m., the first tank engagements began. Egyptian T-55s, protected by infantry and missile teams, advanced across open desert terrain. Israeli tanks engaged with superior firepower and accuracy. Shells exploded against armor. Some tanks were destroyed instantly. Others maneuvered to flank or retreat. The battle was chaotic yet precise. Egyptian forces executed their plan with discipline, while Israeli forces adapted rapidly, relying on training and initiative. Command decisions and split-second reactions determined survival. By 5 a.m., momentum shifted. Egyptian forces, despite losses, pushed deeper into Sinai. Bridges held, pontoon crossings continued, and reserves moved forward. Israeli forces attempted counterattacks, targeting gaps in the Egyptian lines. Tank crews worked under exhaustion, visibility obscured by dust and smoke. Engineers repaired damaged bridges under fire. Every move tested endurance, skill, and nerve. As morning approached, the Sinai Desert had transformed. From quiet sand and distant ridges, it became a theater of armored warfare. Tanks clashed, artillery tore craters, and infantry fought to hold or capture key positions. Commanders on both sides made rapid decisions, redeploying units, redirecting fire, and coordinating attacks. By 6:30 a.m., the scale of the engagement was clear. Hundreds of tanks, artillery units, and infantry were engaged in one of the largest armored battles in Middle Eastern history. The first hours set the stage for the decisive moments. Egyptian forces had achieved surprise and crossed the canal, but Israeli resistance remained formidable. Every tank lost or disabled altered the battlefield. Every successful maneuver allowed one side to press advantage or recover ground. By 7 a.m., the desert was a mixture of fire, smoke, and dust. The outcome was still uncertain. Commanders could see the possibilities, but the chaos of modern armored warfare made predictions nearly impossible. The Sinai tank battles were no longer hypothetical. They were real, brutal, and immediate. Every commander, soldier, and crew member faced the consequences of preparation, strategy, and luck. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, tested every plan. By dawn, the first turning points had occurred, but the full scope of the battle, and the true test of leadership, technology, and human endurance, was only beginning. By mid-morning on October 6, 1973, the Sinai Desert was a sprawling battlefield of fire, dust, and armored metal. Egyptian forces had successfully crossed the Suez Canal, but the cost was already visible. Tanks were smoking, infantry units were pinned down, and artillery positions had been silenced by precise Israeli fire. Yet the Egyptians pressed forward, their discipline and coordination keeping momentum despite losses. Israeli commanders quickly realized the scale of the Egyptian advance. Reinforcements were ordered forward, but the desert's open terrain exposed moving units to artillery and missile fire. Israeli tanks attempted flanking maneuvers, using ridges and sparse cover to gain advantageous positions. Anti-tank teams targeted Egyptian armor, sometimes disabling entire columns. The desert became a lethal chessboard where each move was calculated against firepower, terrain, and timing. By 10 a.m., key Egyptian divisions were deep in Sinai territory, threatening supply lines and observation posts. Egyptian leaders coordinated attacks with relentless precision. Engineers repaired bridges under fire. Artillery units fired barrages to soften Israeli defensive positions before armored columns advanced. Infantry followed, clearing obstacles and securing captured positions. Communication networks functioned effectively, allowing Egyptian units to adjust movements in response to Israeli counterattacks. On the Israeli side, tank crews fought under extreme pressure. Centurions and M60s engaged multiple targets at once, while infantry attempted to hold exposed positions. Commanders made rapid decisions, sometimes sending small units to plug gaps or execute daring counterattacks. Every success was hard-won, every mistake carried immediate consequences. Radios crackled constantly, conveying urgent orders, requests for support, and battlefield updates. By noon, the scale of destruction became apparent. Dozens of tanks lay disabled across the desert. Artillery craters scarred the terrain. Smoke from fires and burning vehicles created a hazy, almost surreal battlefield. Egyptian forces had achieved surprise and penetrated Israeli defenses, but the fight was far from over. Israeli counterattacks slowed the advance in several sectors, forcing Egyptian commanders to adapt their timing and coordination. The desert environment continued to influence the battle. Heat and dust strained crews and machinery. Visibility fluctuated with rising heat waves. Tanks overheated. Soldiers dealt with exhaustion, dehydration, and the psychological toll of constant threat. Every maneuver demanded focus, discipline, and endurance. Engineers worked tirelessly, bridging canals, clearing mines, and repairing vehicles under fire. Supply lines were critical. Without fuel or ammunition, even the most skilled units became vulnerable. By late afternoon, decisive moments emerged. Egyptian armored units concentrated fire on key Israeli positions, aiming to break defensive lines and secure strategic terrain. Israeli units attempted to regroup, counterattack, and hold vital positions to prevent encirclement. The desert echoed with gunfire, explosions, and the rumble of engines. Commanders on both sides faced impossible decisions: push forward, risk heavy losses, or consolidate positions to maintain strength. Each choice could shift the balance of the battlefield. By evening, the battle had reached a critical turning point. Egyptian forces controlled significant portions of the Sinai, while Israeli units had slowed some advances but could not push back the entire offensive. Both sides assessed casualties, equipment losses, and the potential for reinforcements. Commanders realized that the next hours would determine whether the battle remained an Egyptian breakthrough or whether Israeli forces could stabilize the front and prevent further penetration. The first day of the Sinai tank battles demonstrated the complexity of modern armored warfare. Surprise, preparation, discipline, technology, and human endurance collided in the desert. Decisions were made under extreme pressure, with every action affecting survival and outcome. By nightfall, both armies paused briefly to regroup, repair, and plan for the next day's operations. The desert remained silent for a moment, but the tension lingered. The battle was far from over, and both sides understood that the coming hours would test everything they had learned, trained for, and prepared. By the end of the first day of fighting in the Sinai Desert, the battlefield bore the scars of relentless armored warfare. Craters from artillery shells pocked the sand. Burned-out tanks, both Egyptian and Israeli, lay twisted and blackened across ridges and valleys. Smoke rose from destroyed supply trucks and fuel depots, drifting in the desert wind. The sheer scale of destruction reflected the ferocity and intensity of the armored engagements. Casualties were significant. On the Egyptian side, hundreds of soldiers were killed or wounded in the initial assault. Tank crews suffered heavily from direct hits and explosions. Israeli forces also endured losses, with crews trapped inside destroyed Centurions and M60s. Infantry units on both sides faced artillery fire, sniper attacks, and the constant threat of ambush. Every surviving soldier carried exhaustion, fear, and the psychological weight of witnessing comrades fall. Commanders were forced to adjust strategies in real time, accounting not only for territory but for the depletion of men and machines. Infrastructure damage added another layer of consequence. Bridges spanning the Suez Canal, critical for moving troops and supplies, had been destroyed or heavily damaged. Egyptian engineers worked under fire to repair crossings, while Israeli forces attempted to prevent further repairs and limit mobility. Observation posts, communication towers, and defensive bunkers were compromised. The desert terrain itself became littered with wreckage, shaping how subsequent operations could unfold. Supply lines, already stretched thin by the harsh environment, faced immediate challenges. Fuel shortages threatened both Egyptian and Israeli armored units. Ammunition depots were damaged, and medical support struggled to reach the wounded under continuing artillery fire. Engineers and logistical units were tasked with clearing debris, repairing bridges, and ensuring that essential supplies reached frontline soldiers. The success of these efforts directly affected the ability of units to continue fighting effectively. Command and morale became a central concern. Egyptian commanders celebrated the initial success of crossing the canal and penetrating Israeli lines but remained aware of the high cost. Decisions about advancing further or consolidating positions had to balance momentum with survival. Israeli leaders, facing unexpected pressure and casualties, reassessed defensive strategies and coordinated counterattacks for the following days. Both armies understood that maintaining discipline and morale under extreme conditions was as critical as firepower. Intelligence reports and battlefield observations played a decisive role in shaping immediate reactions. Egyptian commanders used reconnaissance to identify weaknesses in Israeli positions, reinforcing attacks where resistance was lower. Israeli units analyzed engagement outcomes to locate gaps in their lines and to plan counteroffensives. Each side adapted quickly, but the desert's harshness, heat, dust, and uneven terrain limited flexibility. Even small miscalculations could result in lost vehicles, lives, or strategic positions. The psychological impact on surviving soldiers was profound. Many had experienced their first intense combat. Some witnessed their tanks destroyed in seconds. Others were responsible for firing at enemies only meters away, knowing mistakes could be fatal. Exhaustion, dehydration, and constant alertness created mental fatigue. Yet, acts of discipline, courage, and teamwork allowed units to maintain operational capability despite physical and emotional strain. By nightfall, the Sinai Desert had transformed. What had begun as an early morning crossing became a sprawling, chaotic battlefield. Commanders reviewed maps and intelligence reports, tallying losses, evaluating unit readiness, and planning adjustments. Engineers and medical teams worked through the night, repairing vital infrastructure and treating wounded soldiers. Both sides understood that the battle had entered a critical phase, and the events of the first day would influence tactics, morale, and outcomes for days to come. The first day's aftermath also highlighted broader military lessons. Egyptian forces proved that careful planning, coordination, and disciplined execution could overcome technological disadvantages. Israeli forces recognized the dangers of underestimating an opponent and the importance of anticipating well-prepared strategies. Tactical decisions, logistical efficiency, and environmental awareness were as decisive as firepower in shaping the battle's early outcomes. In essence, the aftermath of the initial Sinai tank battles underscored the complexity and brutality of modern armored warfare. Casualties, equipment losses, and psychological strain combined with strategic and logistical challenges to create a battlefield environment where every decision mattered. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had tested both armies to their limits. By the end of the first day, the consequences of planning, preparation, and human endurance were already evident, and the coming days promised to further test the limits of soldiers, commanders, and technology alike. In the days following the initial Sinai tank battles, the scale of both human and material consequences became clearer. Egyptian forces, having crossed the Suez Canal and penetrated Israeli defenses, consolidated positions along the eastern bank. They held critical territory, but at significant cost. Hundreds of tanks had been destroyed or damaged. Artillery units had suffered losses. Thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or exhausted from continuous combat. Egyptian commanders faced the dual challenge of maintaining momentum while managing the limitations of logistics, supply lines, and battlefield fatigue. Israeli forces had also suffered. Commanders recognized that initial intelligence failures and underestimation of Egyptian preparation had contributed to losses. Hundreds of tanks had been damaged or destroyed. Infantry and support units had been pinned, and some positions were temporarily lost. However, Israeli adaptability, training, and firepower allowed them to regroup. Reinforcements were mobilized, counterattacks launched, and damaged defensive positions repaired. The army learned rapidly from the first days, adjusting strategies to respond to Egyptian tactics while preparing for the prolonged struggle ahead. Beyond immediate military outcomes, the aftermath included significant psychological and social consequences. Survivors carried the memory of intense combat, the sight of destroyed vehicles, and the loss of comrades. Both Egyptian and Israeli soldiers faced fatigue, trauma, and stress, which influenced morale and performance in subsequent operations. Commanders worked not only to restore defensive lines but also to maintain the mental resilience of their troops. For many soldiers, the Sinai would remain a lasting imprint, a harsh lesson in the realities of armored warfare. The battle also revealed the critical role of technology and coordination. Egyptian forces demonstrated that careful preparation and disciplined execution could offset technological disadvantages. Anti-tank missiles, artillery barrages, and combined arms tactics had effectively challenged Israel's superior tanks. Israeli forces, in turn, recognized the importance of integrating armor, infantry, artillery, and air support to respond to unexpected breakthroughs. The lessons learned in Sinai would influence military doctrine for years, shaping how armored divisions planned maneuvers, supported supply lines, and coordinated attacks under combat conditions. Strategically, the battle had wider political implications. Egypt's initial successes bolstered national morale and strengthened President Sadat's position domestically. Internationally, the conflict drew attention from both superpowers. The United States closely monitored Israel, providing intelligence and logistical support. The Soviet Union supplied Egypt with reinforcements and equipment while advising caution to prevent escalation beyond the region. The Sinai tank battles became a focal point for Cold War diplomacy, demonstrating that local conflicts could have global significance. Casualties and equipment losses also prompted military assessments and reforms. Both armies conducted post-battle analyses. Egyptian commanders evaluated crossing techniques, artillery deployment, and coordination between armored and infantry units. Israeli forces reassessed defensive strategies, early warning systems, and reserve deployment. The experience reinforced the importance of preparation, flexibility, and rapid decision-making in desert armored warfare. Lessons from Sinai were later studied in military academies worldwide, illustrating the modern principles of combined arms operations, surprise, and battlefield adaptation. Infrastructure and logistical considerations had lasting effects. Destroyed bridges, roads, and supply depots required repair. Fuel and ammunition stockpiles had to be replenished quickly to maintain operational capacity. Medical services were expanded to handle large numbers of casualties. Engineering units worked under constant pressure to restore mobility and ensure that both sides could continue fighting effectively. The battle highlighted that success in modern warfare depends as much on maintaining supply lines and infrastructure as on winning engagements. By the end of the initial phase of the Sinai campaign, the human, tactical, and strategic costs were undeniable. Hundreds of tanks destroyed, thousands of soldiers affected, and vast areas of desert scarred by artillery fire demonstrated the destructive power of modern armored warfare. Yet the battle also showed the capacity for human endurance, ingenuity, and coordination under extreme conditions. Soldiers on both sides adapted, commanders learned, and nations reassessed strategies based on the lessons of the battlefield. The Sinai tank battles left a clear legacy. Preparation, intelligence, and discipline could determine outcomes even against technologically superior opponents. Terrain and environment shaped tactics, logistics dictated operational capability, and human endurance influenced every engagement. The conflict highlighted that armored warfare was not only a contest of machines but a test of planning, morale, leadership, and resilience. In essence, the aftermath of the Sinai tank battles was not simply measured by territory gained or lost but by the transformation in military understanding. Both Egypt and Israel emerged with new insights into the realities of modern warfare, and the world observed how tactical decisions, preparation, and coordination in the desert could shift regional power dynamics. The battles would be remembered as a demonstration of the deadly effectiveness and complexity of armored operations in the Middle East. The Sinai tank battles of 1973 left an enduring mark on modern military history. They showed that preparation, discipline, and coordination could outweigh technological superiority, and that the desert itself could shape the outcome of warfare. Every tank, every soldier, and every decision played a part in a larger story of strategy, endurance, and human resolve. For Egypt, the initial successes proved that careful planning and unity of command could challenge even the most confident adversary. Crossing the Suez Canal and breaching fortified positions required precise timing, courage, and perseverance. For Israel, the battles revealed the dangers of underestimating a well-prepared enemy, emphasizing that intelligence, adaptability, and rapid decision-making were as crucial as firepower. The Sinai Desert became more than a battlefield. It was a proving ground. Terrain, climate, and logistics all influenced the course of events, reminding military planners that war is as much about environment and preparation as it is about strategy and equipment. Soldiers endured harsh conditions, fatigue, and fear, demonstrating resilience in moments of extreme pressure. Their experiences highlighted the human dimension of warfare, where training, morale, and instinct often determine survival. Beyond the battlefield, the conflict influenced regional politics and military doctrine worldwide. Armies studied the lessons of Sinai, integrating insights about combined arms operations, armored tactics, and the interplay of technology and human factors. The battle became a reference point for understanding modern armored warfare in deserts and open terrain. Ultimately, the Sinai tank battles were a testament to the complexity of war. They were not won by machines alone, nor by individual heroism, but by preparation, coordination, and endurance under unforgiving conditions. The desert tested every element, men, machines, and plans, and revealed the fragile balance between strategy, technology, and human capacity. The echoes of that clash continue to inform how armies fight, plan, and adapt, demonstrating that even in modern warfare, the smallest decisions can ripple across history. If this story of courage, strategy, and survival in the Sinai Desert moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic, historically accurate documentaries. Hit the like button to support real history being told the way it happened. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of the Sinai tank battles surprised you the most? And turn on notifications so you won't miss our next journey into the battles, leaders, and moments that shaped modern warfare. History is more than dates and numbers. It's lived, fought, and remembered. Join us as we uncover it, one story at a time.